Ethan Cole was not supposed to be part of anything important. He knew that. Everyone around him knew that. It was not an insult. It was just a fact that had settled into his life slowly, the way dust settles on things you stop paying attention to. He was 28 years old and worked the night shift at a deep space listening station built into the dry hills outside a small town most people had never heard of. The kind of place that showed up on maps only if you zoomed in too far. The facility had a long official name that sounded impressive when written down, but nobody who worked there used it. They just called it the Array, like it was the only one that mattered. Ethan monitored incoming signals. That was the job. He sat in a narrow room filled with low, constant noise, the hum of cooling systems, the soft clicking of relays, the faint electric whisper of machines doing exactly what they had been designed to do. In front of him were 6 screens, each showing different streams of data pulled from the sky. Frequencies, waveforms, shifting patterns that meant something to someone, somewhere. Most of the time, they meant nothing. Stars burned. Gas clouds drifted. Radiation moved through space the way it always had, long before anyone on Earth had thought to listen to it. The universe was busy, but it was not interesting. Not in the way people hoped. Ethan had learned that in his first month. At the beginning, he had paid attention to everything. Every spike, every fluctuation, every irregularity. He had leaned forward in his chair and stared at the screens like they might suddenly decide to tell him something important. They never did. After a while, you learned the difference between something unusual and something meaningful. Unusual happened all the time. Meaningful never did. So now he watched without really watching. His eyes moved across the screens out of habit more than intention, picking up the broad shapes, ignoring the details unless something forced him not to. He had a tablet propped up beside the console, playing a rerun of a game he had already seen twice. The volume was low. Just enough to fill the silence without interrupting it. On the desk, there was a paper cup with coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. He drank it anyway. The clock in the corner of the main screen read 2:17 a.m. It would read something else eventually. That was the most reliable kind of change his job offered. He shifted in his chair, stretched one arm, and let his eyes drift back across the data feeds. A long, slow sweep. Left to right. Top to bottom. Nothing. The same as always. There were protocols for when something actually happened. Clear steps. Simple instructions. He had memorized them during training and then, over time, stopped thinking about them entirely. They existed in the same category as emergency exits and fire alarms, important, but distant. The kind of thing you expected someone else to deal with. Because nothing ever happened here. That was the truth of it. The Array listened. The universe spoke. And all it ever said was more of the same. Ethan leaned back slightly and rubbed his eyes with the heel of his hand. The light from the screens left faint patterns behind his eyelids for a second before fading. He took another sip of the cold coffee and made a face he didn't bother finishing. Outside the facility, the night stretched wide and empty. No city lights, no traffic, nothing but open land and sky. The kind of place where the stars looked sharper than they did anywhere else, like someone had adjusted the focus just for this one patch of Earth. Not that Ethan could see them from inside. Not that it mattered. He had spent enough nights here to know exactly what was above him without looking. Everything. And nothing. He reached over and tapped the edge of the tablet, skipping ahead in the game without really caring what part he landed on. The players moved. The crowd reacted. Something happened that mattered to someone, somewhere else. In the control room, nothing changed. The machines hummed. The data flowed. The universe continued being exactly what it had always been. Predictable. Quiet. And completely, perfectly uninterested in being understood. Ethan rested his chin briefly in his hand and stared at the center screen without focusing on it. He was not waiting for anything. That was the part most people didn't understand when they imagined jobs like this. They thought it was about anticipation. About sitting in the dark, waiting for the moment something impossible finally broke through the noise. It wasn't. It was about time. Time passing. Time filling space. Time moving forward whether anything happened inside it or not. He checked the clock again. 2:23 a.m. 6 minutes gone. He didn't remember them passing. That was normal too. He adjusted slightly in his chair, letting it creak under the shift in weight, and let his eyes drift back to the screens one more time. A habit. Nothing more. Nothing ever changed. It changed quietly. So quietly that Ethan almost missed it. His eyes were moving across the screens the way they always did, slow, automatic, unfocused, when something on the far right display didn't match the rhythm he was used to seeing. He didn't react at first. That happened sometimes. A flicker. A brief spike. A shape that didn't quite belong. The system was sensitive enough to pick up things that most people would consider meaningless, and most of those things were exactly that. Meaningless. Ethan's gaze moved past it. Then, a second later, it came back. Not the spike. The feeling. He frowned slightly and leaned forward, his attention narrowing just enough to bring the right-hand screen into focus. There. A small fluctuation in the waveform. Nothing dramatic. No alarms. No flashing warnings. Just a deviation, tight, contained, almost neat in the way it broke from the surrounding noise. He watched it for a few seconds. The pattern smoothed out again, blending back into the usual random motion of background radiation. For a moment, he thought that was it. Just another irregularity doing what irregularities did, appearing briefly and then disappearing without explanation. He exhaled softly and leaned back. Nothing, he muttered under his breath, more out of habit than conviction. His hand drifted toward the coffee again. He stopped halfway. The waveform shifted. Ethan's eyes snapped back to the screen. The fluctuation had returned. Same place. Same shape. That was less common. He straightened slightly in his chair, setting the coffee down without drinking it this time. His attention sharpened, the lazy rhythm of the night giving way to something more focused, more deliberate. He watched. The signal moved through its cycle, noise, drift, random variation, and then, exactly where it had before, the same deviation appeared again. Clean. Contained. Gone. Just there. Laid out in the structure of the signal like someone had written them carefully and then pressed send. Ethan sat very still. The room didn't feel the same anymore. The hum of the machines was still there, but it had shifted in his perception, like it was further away now. Like something else had taken priority in the space around him. He ran the filter again. Fresh pass. The data reassembled itself. The pattern remained. Unchanged. He ran it again. Same result. Again. Same. Ethan exhaled slowly, not realizing until that moment that he had been holding his breath. That's, he said quietly. He didn't finish the sentence. Because he didn't have a version of it that made sense. Noise didn't produce prime numbers. Not like that. Not clean. Not repeated. Not exact. He knew what interference looked like. He knew what random alignment looked like. This wasn't either of those things. This was structured. Intentional. Designed. He leaned back in his chair, just slightly, eyes still locked on the screen as the signal looped again. 12 seconds. That was the interval. He checked the timing again to be sure. Start to start. 12 seconds exactly. No drift. No variation. It repeated again. The same pattern unfolded. Prime numbers embedded inside frequency shifts that were too precise to be accidental. Ethan swallowed. His mouth felt dry. Okay, he said. But this time, the word didn't steady anything. Because now he understood something that made the room feel smaller. Quieter. He wasn't looking at a glitch. He wasn't looking at interference. He wasn't even looking at something unusual. He was looking at something that had been built. Something that had been sent. The thought settled in slowly, like something heavy lowering into place. Not rushed. Not dramatic. Just certain. Ethan turned his head slightly and looked at the other screens. They were still doing what they always did. Streaming noise. Random motion. Meaningless patterns. Normal. Then he looked back at the signal. Still there. Still repeating. Still perfect. He reached for his coffee without looking, took a sip, and immediately set it back down. Cold. He didn't care. His attention had narrowed completely now. There was no game playing on the tablet anymore. No background distraction. No drifting thoughts. Just the signal. And the pattern inside it. Prime numbers. Clean. Deliberate. Impossible to explain away. Ethan rested his hands lightly on the edge of the desk and leaned forward again, closer than before. As if proximity would change something. It didn't. The signal looped again. 12 seconds. Perfect. Patient. Unchanging. He stared at it for a long moment. Then finally said the only thing left that made sense. That's not noise. The words hung in the room for a second, quiet but absolute. Because once you crossed that line, once you admitted that, there was only one direction left to go. Ethan looked at the signal as it repeated again. And this time, he didn't feel curiosity. Or confusion. Or even excitement. Just a single, steady realization. Someone had put that there. And it had been waiting. Ethan didn't call anyone right away. Not because he didn't know the protocol. He did. He just needed a second. He stared at the signal as it looped again, the pattern unfolding with the same quiet precision. 12 seconds. Start to finish. No variation. No decay. No sign that it had ever been anything else. Prime numbers. Someone had chosen those. Not random. Not accidental. Not natural. Chosen. He leaned back slowly, one hand running across his face as if that might reset something in his head. Okay, he said again, softer now. Then he reached for the phone. Dr. Elena Voss arrived 37 minutes later. She didn't rush in. That was the first thing Ethan noticed. She walked into the control room still wearing her jacket, her expression neutral, almost tired, like she had been pulled out of sleep and wasn't yet convinced it had been worth it. That better not be another ghost echo, she said, setting her bag down without looking at him. It's not, Ethan replied. He didn't say anything else. He just turned the main screen toward her. Elena stepped closer, adjusting her glasses slightly as she looked at the waveform. At first, her expression didn't change. She had seen thousands of signals. Most of them looked interesting for about 3 seconds before resolving into something familiar and unimportant. She watched one full cycle. Then another. Her posture shifted slightly. Run it clean, she said. Ethan already had. He ran it again anyway. The system filtered the data, stripped out known interference, isolated the signal. The pattern remained unchanged. Elena leaned in a fraction closer. Overlay, she said. Ethan layered multiple cycles. Perfect alignment. No drift. No distortion. Her hand paused just above the console. Again, she said. He ran it again. Same result. The room went quiet. Not silent, the machines were still there, the hum unchanged, but the kind of quiet that forms when two people realize they are looking at the same thing and neither of them wants to say it first. Elena straightened slowly. How long? She asked. First noticed at 2:17, Ethan said. It hasn't changed. She glanced at the clock. 3:04 a.m. And you're just calling this in now? She asked, but there was no real edge to it. I wanted to be sure, he said. She didn't respond to that. Her eyes were back on the screen. Pull the deep structure, she said. Ethan hesitated half a second. That wasn't standard first-step analysis. It was what you did when you thought there was something more than just a signal. Then he nodded and brought it up. The system took longer this time. Processing. Breaking the waveform down beyond surface-level patterns, digging into the underlying frequency shifts, the layers beneath the obvious. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then the data reassembled. Not as a waveform. As structure. Elena's expression changed. Just slightly. But enough. There's more, she said. Ethan didn't answer. He could see it too. The prime sequence was just the surface layer. Beneath it, woven through subtle shifts in frequency and spacing, was something else. Something more complex. Not random. Not noise. Organized. Layered. He zoomed in, isolating a section of the deeper pattern. It didn't resolve into anything obvious. Not numbers. Not shapes. Not anything he could name. But it was consistent. Repeating. Intentional. Elena's hand moved slowly to the edge of the desk, fingers resting there as if she needed the contact. That's not just a beacon, she said quietly. Ethan felt a small tightening in his chest. Then what is it? He asked. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes stayed on the data, tracking the layers, the repetition, the structure that sat just beyond immediate understanding. When she finally spoke, her voice was lower. Something built this to be found, she said. The words settled into the room with weight. Not speculation. Not theory. Recognition. Ethan looked back at the signal as it looped again. 12 seconds. Prime numbers. And something underneath. Waiting. For who? He asked. Elena exhaled slowly. Anyone who could understand it, she said. The signal repeated again. Unchanged. Patient. Ethan felt it then. Not excitement. Not fear. Something heavier. Because if it was designed to be found, then it had a purpose. And things with purpose didn't just exist. They meant something. He swallowed once. What does it say? He asked. Elena was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached forward and tapped a control, isolating one segment of the deeper structure. It's not a language, she said. Not in any form we recognize. Ethan frowned slightly. Then how do you? Pattern intent, she said, cutting in gently. Structure. Emphasis. Repetition inside repetition. She adjusted the display, highlighting certain frequency clusters. Look at this, she said. Ethan leaned in. At first, it still looked abstract. Then, slowly, something began to emerge, not as a translation, not as words, but as a shape of meaning. A pattern that pointed in one direction. Over and over again. Elena's voice dropped even further. It's not just saying, we are here, she said. Ethan felt his pulse pick up slightly. Then what? She didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed on the screen. It's saying something is wrong. The room seemed to shrink around that sentence. Ethan stared at the signal as it looped again. The same perfect structure. The same precise repetition. The same quiet insistence. How wrong? He asked. Elena didn't answer immediately. She adjusted the data again, isolating a longer segment, watching how the deeper layer interacted with the prime sequence. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. But there was something under it now. Something new. It's not a greeting, she said. Ethan didn't move. It's not an introduction. The signal repeated again. 12 seconds. Unchanged. Elena exhaled slowly. It's a distress call. The words landed heavier than anything else so far. Not abstract. Not theoretical. Immediate. Real. Ethan leaned back slightly, eyes still locked on the screen. A distress call. From where? From when? From who? The questions came all at once, stacking faster than he could process them. But underneath all of them was something simpler. Something harder to ignore. Someone had sent this. On purpose. With structure. With intent. And they hadn't sent it for no reason. Ethan glanced at the clock again. 3:12 a.m. Less than an hour since the anomaly first appeared. It felt like something else entirely. He looked back at the signal. Still there. Still repeating. Still waiting. How long has it been running? He asked quietly. Elena didn't look away from the data. Long enough to reach us, she said. Ethan felt that settle in. Not just distance. Time. The signal looped again. Patient. Unchanging. As if it had all the time in the world. And nothing else left to do. By morning, it wasn't just their signal anymore. Ethan hadn't left his seat. At some point, someone had brought him fresh coffee. At some point, more people had entered the room. Voices had come and gone. Screens had been mirrored. Data had been copied, analyzed, transmitted. Time had stopped moving in a way he could measure. But the signal kept repeating. 12 seconds. Perfect. Unchanging. And now, confirmed. 3 independent arrays, someone said from across the room. Different hemispheres. Same structure, same timing. Ethan didn't turn. He didn't need to. If it was being seen somewhere else, that meant it was real in a way that couldn't be dismissed anymore. No local interference. No equipment fault. No mistake. Elena stood beside him, arms folded, eyes fixed on the central display. They're pulling satellite data now, she said quietly. We'll have orbital confirmation soon. Ethan nodded once. It felt automatic. Like his body was still doing normal things while the rest of him tried to keep up with something much larger. How long before this goes public? He asked. Elena didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was measured. It won't, she said. Ethan finally looked at her. What? She met his gaze briefly. Not yet. That was all she said. But it was enough. By midday, the room was no longer theirs. People Ethan had never seen before had taken positions behind them, around them, near the doors. Quiet conversations. Controlled movements. No one raising their voice, but everyone speaking like every word mattered. New equipment had been rolled in. Secure lines opened. Access restricted. The screens hadn't changed. The signal still looped. But everything around it had. A man in a dark suit stood near the far wall, speaking in low tones to someone on a headset. Another woman, older, precise in the way she moved, reviewed data on a tablet with the kind of focus that suggested she had already made several decisions no one else knew about yet. Ethan stayed in his chair. No one told him to move. No one told him to stay. He just remained. Because the signal was still there. And somehow, that still felt like his responsibility. Origin estimate? The question came from behind him. Not loud. But it cut through everything. Elena answered without turning. Preliminary triangulation puts it approximately 400 light-years out, she said. A pause. Margin of error? The voice asked. Small, she replied. The structure helps. It's consistent enough to lock onto. Ethan felt that number settle in. 400 light-years. That wasn't just distance. That was time. Whoever sent it. They hadn't sent it recently. The realization spread through the room slowly. Not spoken all at once. But understood. 400 years. That's how long the signal had been traveling. For centuries of silence between the moment it was sent and the moment it was heard. Ethan stared at the waveform as it repeated again. 12 seconds. Perfect. Patient. Waiting. They've been waiting a long time, he said quietly. Elena didn't respond. But she didn't disagree. It changed again that afternoon. Not the signal. Everything around it. The secure lines became more active. Conversations grew tighter. Shorter. Focused in a way that suggested decisions were being made elsewhere, faster than anyone in the room could track. Then one of the new analysts spoke up. Secondary structure flagged, she said. Ethan turned slightly. What? She didn't look up. There's something else in it, she said. Deeper layer. It's faint, we almost missed it. Elena stepped forward immediately. Show me. The analyst pulled it up. At first, it looked like noise. Even more subtle than the underlying structure they had already identified. But once it was isolated, it stayed. Consistent. Present in every cycle. Ethan leaned forward again, that now familiar tension tightening in his chest. What is that? He asked. The analyst hesitated. Not sure yet. Elena's eyes narrowed slightly. Enhance it, she said. The system processed. Stripped away everything it could. Focused. Refined. And slowly, something emerged. Not a pattern like the primes. Not a structure like the message. Something narrower. Quieter. But intentional. Ethan felt it before he understood it. The same way he had with the anomaly. The same way he had with the pattern. That's not part of the original signal, he said. No one answered immediately. Because they were all seeing it. The difference. This layer wasn't integrated the same way. It wasn't built into the foundation. It was added. Later. Elena spoke carefully. It's a channel, she said. Ethan blinked. A what? She didn't take her eyes off the screen. A relay, she clarified. Something separate. Something, waiting. The word settled into the room. Waiting. Ethan looked back at the signal as it looped again. 12 seconds. Perfect. But now there was something else there. Something hidden. Something quiet. Something that didn't belong to the original message. Waiting for what? He asked. Elena didn't answer. Because at that exact moment, the signal changed. Not the structure. Not the pattern. Something smaller. Deeper. The hidden layer shifted. Just slightly. But enough. The room went completely still. Ethan leaned forward, heart picking up without permission. Did you see that? Someone whispered. Yes, Elena said. Her voice was steady. But tighter now. Ethan stared at the data. The shift hadn't broken anything. Hadn't altered the message. It had just responded. A small adjustment. A reaction. To them. To the analysis. To the attention. Ethan felt something cold settle in his chest. That wasn't random, he said. No one argued. Because now there was only one explanation left. The signal wasn't just a message. It wasn't just something sent and forgotten. It was still active. Still functioning. Still. Watching. Ethan swallowed once, his eyes locked on the screen. How long? He started, then stopped. Then tried again. How long has that been there? No one had an answer. Because no one had known to look for it. Until now. The signal looped again. 12 seconds. Perfect. Patient. But no longer silent. Not really. Because now they knew something else. Something that shifted everything. They weren't the first to hear it. They were just the first to respond. And somewhere. Across 400 light-years of space. Something had noticed. They responded. That decision was made faster than anyone expected. Not publicly. Not officially. But somewhere above the level Ethan could see, a line had been crossed, and the instruction had come down quietly and without room for debate. Send something back. Not much. Just enough. A controlled signal. Structured. Careful. Built using the same mathematical framework as the original message, prime sequences, harmonic spacing, clean repetition. Simple. Intentional. We hear you. That was the meaning, stripped down to its core. Ethan watched as the transmission was prepared, verified, checked again, then routed through systems he didn't have access to. Layers of approval happened in silence, each one invisible but present in the delay between steps. Then, finally, send. The word was soft. But it carried weight. The signal left Earth. And for the first time since Ethan had walked into the room, there was nothing to do but wait. The reply came back in 9 hours. That was the moment everything changed. Ethan wasn't the one who noticed it first. He heard the shift in the room before he saw it, a tightening, a sudden stillness, the kind that spreads when something impossible happens and everyone recognizes it at the same time. Response received, someone said. Ethan turned. How? He didn't finish. Because he already understood the problem. 400 light-years. That was the distance. Even at the speed of light, a reply should have taken centuries. Not hours. Not 9. Elena was already moving, pulling the incoming data onto the main display. Confirm source, she said. Same channel, the analyst replied. Same embedded layer. Ethan felt the cold return, sharper this time. The hidden layer. The relay. The thing that wasn't part of the original signal. It hadn't just been waiting. It had been listening. The incoming structure wasn't like the first message. It was cleaner. More direct. Less like a broadcast. More like a conversation. Ethan watched the pattern form as the system translated what it could, mapping unfamiliar structures into something approximating meaning. At first, it didn't resolve. Then slowly, pieces aligned. Not words. Not exactly. But intent. Clarity. Presence. Elena leaned closer to the screen. It's not them, she said. Ethan blinked. What? She didn't look away. The ones who sent the distress signal, she said. This isn't them. A pause. Then who is it? Ethan asked. The answer came from the translation system before anyone else could speak. A designation. Not a name. But the closest approximation the system could produce. We are the Volari. The word hung in the air. Unfamiliar. Precise. Deliberate. Ethan stared at it. They've been watching, Elena said quietly. It came in fragments at first. Not because the message was broken. Because it was layered. Complex in a way that required interpretation rather than direct translation. A team formed around it immediately, linguists, analysts, people Ethan had never seen before, all working in tight coordination, building meaning piece by piece. Hours passed. Then a clearer structure emerged. And with it, context. Ethan listened as Elena read the first full interpretation aloud. 43 star systems received the signal, she said. He felt that number hit before he processed it. 43. Not just Earth. Not just them. 11 of those systems developed civilizations capable of receiving it, she continued. The room was completely still now. No movement. No side conversations. Nothing but her voice. 7 responded, she said. Ethan swallowed. 7. That meant? 7 civilizations have been in contact with the Volari for centuries, Elena finished. The weight of that settled in. They weren't alone. They hadn't been alone for a long time. They were just late. And the others? Someone asked quietly. Elena looked down at the next section. Her expression didn't change much. But her voice did. Said signal was received by 3 additional civilizations, she read. They chose not to respond. A pause. Reason? Another line. Elena read it. Risk assessment indicated unacceptable threat probability. Ethan let out a slow breath. They heard it, he said. And did nothing. No one argued. And the last one? The analyst asked. Elena didn't answer right away. She looked at the final line of the translation. Then she read it. Final responding civilization, humanity. Silence. Complete. Heavy. Ethan felt it settle in his chest. Not pride. Not fear. Something in between. They're watching us, he said quietly. Elena nodded once. Yes. More data came through. More context. And then. The part that shifted everything again. The Volari are part of a collective, Elena said, scanning the translation as it updated. A council. Multiple advanced civilizations. Long-term cooperation. Ethan exhaled slowly. Of course. It wouldn't just be one. Not at this scale. Not at this level. What do they think of us? Someone asked. Elena hesitated. That was new. She didn't hesitate often. Then she read. Assessment, humanity responded faster than any observed civilization. A pause. That's good, Ethan said. Elena didn't answer immediately. She kept reading. Assessment continues, response included immediate offer of direct intervention. Another pause. Then, conclusion, behavior categorized as anomalous. Ethan frowned slightly. Anomalous how? Elena looked up this time. They don't understand why we would respond that quickly, she said. More translation came in. Deeper layers. More direct. And then. The judgment. Elena's voice was steady again when she read it. Risk classification, elevated. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. Due to behavioral unpredictability, she continued. Demonstrated willingness to engage unknown threat without full assessment. She lowered the tablet slightly. They think we're reckless, she said. The next part came hours later. Not a direct message. A relay. A discussion. Not meant for them. But not hidden either. The council. Deliberating. Ethan listened as fragments were translated. Different voices. Different perspectives. All layered through the relay like distant echoes. They are young, one interpretation read. They act before they understand. They have a history of internal conflict, another said. Their transmissions confirm it. They are unstable. They are untested. They are dangerous. Ethan stared at the screen. Hands resting on the desk. Not moving. Then another voice. Different tone. Stronger. They are the only ones who were not afraid. The line stood out. Clear. Sharp. Alone in the noise of caution. Ethan felt something shift at that. Just slightly. The discussion continued. Long. Detailed. Careful in a way that felt almost suffocating. Every possibility examined. Every risk calculated. Every outcome debated. And underneath all of it, one question. Should humanity be allowed to act? The answer came the next day. Clear. Unanimous. Elena read it without emotion. Council decision: humanity is not to participate in any response to the origin of the signal. Silence. No reaction at first. Just stillness. Ethan stared at the words on the screen. Read them once. Then again. They're telling us to stay out of it, he said. Elena nodded. Yes. A pause. Then he asked the only question that mattered. Are we going to? Elena didn't answer. Because that decision wasn't hers. Not anymore. Hours later, a new message was prepared. Different tone. Different structure. Not just mathematics this time. Something more direct. More human. Ethan didn't see it written. But he heard part of it as it was reviewed aloud. Polite. Careful. Respectful. It acknowledged the council. Their concerns. Their reasoning. And then. It said something else. Something simple. Something that didn't fit into their frameworks. Ethan felt it before the words were finished. And when they were, the room went completely still. We are going anyway. No one spoke for a long moment. Because everyone understood what that meant. Not just defiance. Not just risk. Something deeper. Something the council hadn't accounted for. Ethan looked back at the signal as it looped again. 12 seconds. Perfect. Patient. Waiting. 400 years. He exhaled slowly. Yeah, he said under his breath. Then, quieter. Yeah, we are. The reply was sent. There was no countdown. No announcement. No moment where anyone stood up and declared it out loud. It just went. A structured transmission, precise and controlled, built to carry tone as much as meaning. Respect layered into mathematics. Acknowledgement wrapped in clarity. Ethan didn't see the final version. But he heard enough of it as it moved through the room. It thanked the council. Recognized their experience. Accepted their concerns. It did everything it was supposed to do. And then it said the one thing it was never supposed to say. We are going anyway. The silence after was different. Not tense. Not uncertain. Resolved. Ethan sat back in his chair, eyes still on the signal as it looped again. 12 seconds. Perfect. Unchanged. But now everything around it had shifted. Because the question wasn't if anymore. It was how fast. Things began to move. Fast. Faster than Ethan had ever seen anything move inside a system that usually took weeks to approve minor adjustments. New people came in. Not analysts. Not scientists. Decision makers. The kind who didn't ask what something meant. The kind who decided what would happen next. Orders were given quietly. Resources were redirected. Programs that had been theoretical for years were suddenly active. Ethan didn't have access to most of it. But he could feel it. The way the room changed. The way conversations shortened. The way no one repeated themselves anymore. Everyone understood. There wasn't time. They're calling it a response mission. Ethan turned slightly. Elena stood beside him again, arms folded, watching the screen. A mission, he asked. She nodded once. To the origin point, she said. 400 light years. Ethan let out a slow breath. That's not a mission, he said quietly. That's. He stopped. Because he didn't have a word for it. Neither did she. They won't make it in time. The voice came from behind them. Ethan glanced back. One of the senior analysts. Older. Careful with his words. Even with theoretical drives, he continued, we're talking decades at best. More likely longer. Elena didn't turn. They know, she said. Then why? Because someone is still waiting, she said. That was the end of that conversation. The signal looped again. 12 seconds. Ethan watched it differently now. Not as a discovery. Not as a mystery. But as something unfinished. Something that had started long before him. Long before anyone in this room. And was now, somehow, theirs to answer. Crew selection has started. Ethan blinked. What? Elena didn't look away from the screen. They're building a team, she said. Pilot, systems, medical, translation. Small. Fast. Ethan sat up slightly. They're serious. She gave the smallest nod. They were serious the moment we replied. Another cycle. The signal repeated. Unchanged. But now. It felt different. Because now it wasn't alone. They responded. The words cut through the room. Everyone turned. The analyst at the far station didn't look up. But his voice carried. The Valari. Ethan felt his chest tighten slightly. What did they say? The answer came after a short pause. They acknowledge receipt of our intent. A longer pause. Then, they advise against it. A few quiet breaths moved through the room. Ethan didn't speak. Didn't react. Because he already knew what the answer to that would be. Elena exhaled slowly. Of course they do, she said. More data appeared. More translated fragments. Not just advice. Concern. Warnings. Structured carefully. Delivered without hostility. But clear. Unknown threat probability remains high. Previous non-response decisions based on survival modeling. Intervention not recommended. Ethan stared at the words. All of them made sense. All of them were reasonable. All of them were wrong. He didn't realize he had said it out loud until Elena glanced at him. They're not wrong, she said quietly. Ethan shook his head once. They are, he replied. She didn't argue. But she didn't agree either. The signal looped again. 12 seconds. Perfect. Waiting. Ethan leaned forward slightly, resting his arms on the desk. They had 400 years, he said. Elena didn't respond. They ran the numbers, he continued. They calculated risk. They debated outcomes. Another cycle. They decided it wasn't worth it. Silence. Then, softer. And no one came. Elena looked at the screen. At the signal. At the pattern that had crossed 400 years of empty space just to reach someone who might listen. No, she said. They didn't. The room stayed quiet after that. Not because there was nothing to say. But because everything that mattered had already been said. Ethan sat back slowly. The weight of it settling into something clear. Simple. Not easy. But simple. He looked at the signal one more time as it looped again. 12 seconds. Perfect. Patient. And still. Waiting. They think we're reckless, he said. Elena nodded slightly. Yes. Ethan watched the pattern unfold. Prime numbers. Structure. Intent. A voice, carried across centuries. Asking. Waiting. He exhaled slowly. Maybe we are, he said. A pause. Then? But we're the ones who answered. No one in the room disagreed. Outside, the world was still moving the way it always had. People waking up. Going to work. Living lives that had no idea anything had changed. Inside the facility, everything had. The decision had been made. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But completely. Irreversibly. The mission had already begun. The ship was called Aurora Echo. Ethan had never seen anything like it in person. None of them had. It wasn't large by the standards of imagination people had once had about interstellar travel. No sweeping cathedral-like structure, no shining monument of humanity reaching for the stars. It was functional. Compact. Built like something that expected reality to be harsh and didn't waste time pretending otherwise. And still, when Ethan stood in the observation gallery during final checks, it felt unreal. Because it was leaving. And they were going with it. The launch was not dramatic. There was no countdown on television. No crowds. No public speeches. Just systems checking themselves in silence. One by one, each layer of approval resolved into green. Ethan watched it from a secure feed inside the control room, surrounded by people who now spoke less than they ever had before. Elena stood beside him. Arms folded. Eyes steady. Final clearance, someone said. A pause. Engines live. Another pause. Departure confirmed. And then. Movement. It didn't feel like motion at first. More like absence. The ship simply wasn't where it had been a moment ago. No explosion. No roar. Just a shift in reality that the instruments registered before the human brain fully understood. Then the delay caught up. And Earth was no longer nearby. Ethan sat in silence as the data streams updated. Velocity. Trajectory. Alignment. Everything unfolding exactly as planned. But nothing about it felt normal. Because planning something and doing it were no longer the same category of experience. Not anymore. Inside Aurora Echo, the crew settled into rhythm. Commander Drew Alderman didn't speak much during the first hours. He just watched systems. Let the ship become something familiar before expecting it to be trusted. Dr. Maya Okafor moved between her instruments, running baseline environmental checks even though there was nothing biological yet to examine. Lieutenant Ben Hollis spoke in short bursts, confirming stability, recalibrating systems that didn't strictly need recalibrating. Dr. Irene Shaw stayed quiet for most of the first day. Listening. Not to the ship. To the silence between data points. And Felix Ortega flew them. Not like a man trying to control something impossible. but like someone learning the personality of a machine that might decide to become unpredictable at any moment. He kept a photo above his console. No one commented on it. They never did. Back on Earth, Ethan watched the signal feed alongside the trajectory data. The original signal still looped. 12 seconds. Perfect. Unchanged. Even as the ship that had been built because of it was now moving away from Earth entirely. That's still the strangest part, Ethan said quietly. Elena glanced at him. What is? The signal hasn't changed, he said. She nodded once. No, she agreed. A pause. But we have. 3 weeks into the journey, time stopped feeling linear. There was Earth time, ship time, signal time, and something else Ethan couldn't properly define, something that existed only in relation to distance. 400 light-years stopped being a number. It became a weight, a pressure, a reminder of how far help could really be. The crew adapted faster than expected. Not because it was easy, but because there was no alternative. They reviewed everything again and again. The signal analysis, the council translations, the fragments of the Viore framework. Every layer of understanding they had was rebuilt from scratch and then rebuilt again. Because every time they thought they understood something, they found another layer beneath it. One evening, if evening still meant anything, Drew gathered them in the common module. The ship hummed softly around them. A constant reminder that they were no longer anywhere familiar. Ben spoke first. We still don't know what we're walking into, he said. Maya gave a quiet nod. That hasn't changed, she added. Irene looked down at her tablet. It has, she said. Everyone turned to her. She hesitated. Then continued. The translation layer we've been decoding, it's evolving. That got their attention. Evolving how? Drew asked. Irene hesitated again. Then turned the screen. The data wasn't static anymore. The structure of the signal, its deeper layer, had begun to shift subtly over time. Not breaking. Not decaying. Adjusting. As if reacting to their analysis. Or their distance. Or their presence. Ben frowned. That shouldn't be possible, he said. It isn't, Irene replied. A pause. Then quieter. Unless it's still active. Silence fell in the room. Not fear. Not panic. Something colder. Recognition. Back on Earth, Ethan felt the same realization forming. He stared at the signal feed. Then at the telemetry from the ship. Then back again. They're interacting, he said quietly. Elena nodded. Yes. A pause. With something that sent a message 400 years ago, Ethan added. Elena didn't answer. Because there was nothing reassuring to say. The ship moved deeper into transit. Space outside the viewport became less like emptiness and more like distance itself, measured, structured, endless. The stars didn't feel closer or farther anymore. Just indifferent. And still. The signal continued. 12 seconds. Perfect. Waiting. As if it had never stopped. As if it had always known they would come. One night, Drew stood alone near the observation window. Maya found him there later. Thinking, she asked. He didn't turn. Yes. About the signal? A pause. About what sent it, he said. Maya stepped beside him. And? Drew watched the stars drift past. I think we're already too late, he said quietly. Maya didn't respond immediately. Then? Or exactly on time, she said. Drew gave a small, tired smile. Those are the same thing from far enough away, he replied. Behind them, the ship continued forward. Behind them, Earth kept turning. And ahead, something waited. Still. Patient. 400 years of silence stretching forward into whatever came next. They came out of the drive at the edge of silence. Not the silence of empty space. Something deeper. Something wrong. Commander Drew Alderman noticed it first, not because the instruments screamed, but because they stopped behaving normally. Readings arrived too clean. Too ordered. As if the system itself was trying not to disturb what it was observing. Ben Hollis leaned closer to the console. That's not natural background, he said quietly. No, Maya agreed from across the room. It's absence, Irene added. That word stayed in the air longer than it should have. Absence. Not nothing. Something missing. The system resolved fully. And the star appeared. A calm, ordinary sun. Stable. Unremarkable. The kind of star that should have had noise around it, radio leakage, planetary activity, scattered interference. But there was almost none. Just structure. And stillness. Bring up the inner system scan, Drew said. Ben executed the command. The display unfolded slowly. Layer by layer. Planetary orbits. Mass distributions. Debris mapping. And then. The third planet. The target. The origin. The destination of 400 years of unanswered waiting. At first, it looked intact. Atmosphere present. Ocean signatures stable. Magnetic field weak but functional. Structurally, it should have been alive. But the deeper scan arrived. And everything changed. No global industrial heat. No active energy grid. No atmospheric radio noise. No orbital infrastructure. No surface movement. Nothing. Maya leaned forward slightly. "That's not a dead planet," she said slowly. Drew didn't take his eyes off the display. "What is it?" Maya hesitated. "It's a quiet one." The ship drifted closer. And the truth became clearer. The surface wasn't destroyed. It wasn't burned. It wasn't fractured by war or impact. That he heard the shift in. It was intact. Preserved. Almost carefully. As if someone had removed life from it without breaking anything that life had built. Ben frowned. "That doesn't make sense," he said. "It does," Irene replied softly. Everyone turned to her. She was staring at a different layer of data. "The signal described it," she said. "Described what?" Drew asked. Irene looked up. "Not destruction," she said. "Removal." A silence settled in the room. Not disbelief. Recognition of something worse than destruction. Something intentional. They moved closer. Slow orbit insertion. Careful scans. No one spoke much. Because speaking felt unnecessary when reality was already saying too much. Then Maya's voice broke the silence. "I have something," she said. Everyone turned. Her screen was filled with faint subsurface heat patterns. Irregular. Spread across the northern continent. Deep underground. Biological. Alive. Drew stepped closer. "How many?" Maya zoomed in. The numbers stabilized. Then she spoke. "Hundreds of thousands." A pause. Then correction. "More." Ben exhaled slowly. "They're underground," he said. Irene nodded. "For a long time," she added. Drew didn't look away from the scan. "How long?" No one answered immediately. Because the data already answered it. 400 years. Felix brought the ship into final orbital position. The surface filled the forward display. And for the first time, they saw it. A city. Or what had once been a city. Not ruined. Not collapsed. Standing. Quiet. Empty. Perfectly preserved streets stretching across a landscape that had been allowed to grow over itself. Buildings intact. No fire scars. No structural failure. Just absence of presence. Maya spoke again, quieter this time. "It looks like they left," she said. Irene shook her head slightly. "They didn't leave," she said. Drew turned. "Then what happened to them?" Irene hesitated. Then said the only thing she could. "They were taken." The landing decision was made in under 10 minutes. No debate. No hesitation. Because everyone understood the same thing at the same time. This wasn't just a mission anymore. It was confirmation. The signal wasn't a warning. It was a record. The lander descended. Atmosphere entry was smooth. Too smooth. Felix frowned the entire way down. "That's not normal turbulence," he muttered. "It's regulated," Ben said. "By what?" Maya asked. No one answered. Because there was nothing in the data that should have been regulating anything. And yet, it was stable. Perfectly. Almost, maintained. The lander touched down on a plateau overlooking the city. The air outside was breathable. Warm. Still. Drew was the first to step out. The moment his boots touched the surface, he stopped. Not because of danger. Because of the feeling. The silence here wasn't empty. It was held. Like the world was waiting for permission to speak again. They descended slowly toward the city. No life signs in open view. No movement. No sound beyond wind and distant environmental flow. But everything felt watched. Not in a threatening way. In a remembered way. As if the world recognized visitors and didn't know whether to hope or fear. Then Maya stopped abruptly. "Wait." Everyone turned. She pointed toward the edge of the rubble near the city boundary. Something moved. Slow. Careful. Deliberate. At first, it looked like an animal. Small. Gray-green. But as it stepped forward into clearer view, it became something else. A being. Not human. Not hostile. Just cautious. Observing. It stopped about 30 meters away. And waited. Irene stepped forward slowly. Her translator already active. She spoke the first greeting carefully shaped from months of reconstruction work. A hybrid of harmonic structure and phonetic approximation. A language built from fragments of a broken message. The being didn't move. Then, it responded. A sound. Soft. Uncertain. But recognizable. Not as language. As recognition. Irene froze slightly. Her translator struggled. Then resolved. One word emerged. Incomplete. But clear enough to change everything. Finally. Drew felt something shift in his chest. Not relief. Not fear. Something heavier. Understanding. More movement appeared at the edges of the rubble. One. Then another. Then more. Slowly. Carefully. Dozens. Not attacking. Not fleeing. Just watching. Waiting. Emerging after a lifetime of hiding. And then Irene whispered the numbers she hadn't fully believed yet. They survived. A pause. All this time. Drew looked at the city. At the empty streets. At the standing buildings. At the silence that wasn't emptiness, but endurance. And for the first time since this mission began, he understood the full weight of the message they had followed across the stars. Not a warning. Not a curiosity. A plea. Still waiting. Even after 400 years. Behind them, the ship remained in orbit. Above them, the sky remained unchanged. And ahead, something that had been waiting longer than history finally saw them. They were not alone in the city anymore. Not because more humans arrived. But because the silence had finally started to break. Slowly. Carefully. As if afraid it would collapse again if it spoke too loudly. Drew Alderman stood at the center of what had once been a plaza. Now it was just open stone. Wind moving through empty structures. And around him, they gathered. The survivors. Not hundreds. Not thousands. Hundreds of thousands. Hidden beneath the surface for 4 centuries. Coming up now in small groups. Like memory returning to a forgotten world. Irene had stopped translating words. Because words weren't enough anymore. She was translating presence. And what she felt coming from them wasn't fear. It was disbelief. Not that humans had arrived. But that anyone had arrived at all. One of them stepped forward. Closer than the others. Older than the rest. Its movements were slow, deliberate, weighted with time. It stopped in front of Drew. And for a long moment, neither moved. Then Irene spoke softly. It remembers the signal, she said. Drew didn't look away. Ask it what happened. She hesitated. Then spoke. The being responded immediately. Long. Layered. Not fully translatable. But fragments came through. And those fragments were enough. They came, Irene translated slowly. They did not arrive with war. A pause. They arrived with silence. Drew frowned slightly. Silence. Not invasion. Not destruction. Not fire. Silence. The translation continued. They removed the surface first, Irene said. Drew's expression tightened. What does that mean? Irene swallowed. They didn't destroy the world, she said. They removed its connectivity. A pause. All systems. All coordination. All signals. All shared awareness. Maya stepped closer. So they isolated them, she said quietly. Irene nodded. Completely. Drew looked at the empty city again. Understanding shifting slowly into place. Not destruction of matter. Disconnection of life. A civilization not erased. But separated from itself until it could no longer function as one. And the survivors? Ben asked. Irene listened. Then answered. They went underground. A pause. They hid from absence. The being in front of Drew made another sound. Irene translated again. They waited for the signal to be answered, she said. Drew felt something cold settle in his chest. Why send it so far? He asked quietly. Irene listened again. Then spoke. Because they did not know if they were the only ones left. Silence again. Not empty. Heavy. Then, something shifted in the atmosphere. Not physically. But perceptibly. Like attention turning. The sky above the city seemed aware. Ben was the first to notice the anomaly. Orbit just changed, he said quickly over comms. Drew's attention snapped upward. What? There's a field forming around the system, Ben continued. Not natural. Not ours. Maya stepped back slightly. What kind of field? Ben hesitated. A containment field. The word landed hard. Containment. Drew looked back at the survivors. At the city. At the sky. Understanding sharpened. They're still here, he said quietly. No one asked who he meant. The being in front of him made another sound. Irene froze slightly as she translated. They are watching, she said. A pause. They always return when the signal is answered. Drew exhaled slowly. So the signal wasn't just a message, he said. Irene nodded. It was a marker. Everything clicked. 400 years. Not just waiting. Not just loss. A test. A signal broadcast into darkness to see who would respond. And now, the response had arrived. Maya looked up at the sky. We triggered something, she said. Ben didn't disagree. I think we just told it where to look, he said quietly. Drew looked at the survivors again. At the ones who had endured silence for generations. And for the first time, he understood the full cost of what they had walked into. Not just rescue. Not just first contact. But attention. Of something vast enough that civilizations learned to hide from it. The being stepped closer. And this time, it didn't stop at distance. It reached out. Slowly. Not aggressively. Not fearfully. Just, hoping. Irene translated the final fragment. They call you the Walkers, she said. Drew blinked slightly. Walkers? Irene nodded. Those who move toward what others refuse to face. A long silence followed. Wind moved through the empty city. The sky above held still. And somewhere far beyond it, something was watching. Still. Drew looked at the survivors. At the people who had endured 400 years in the dark. At the signal that had carried their existence across the galaxy. And at the humans who had answered it without hesitation. Then he spoke. Not as a commander. Not as a representative. But as someone who had finally understood the weight of arrival. We heard you, he said quietly. We came. A pause. And we're not leaving you behind again. Behind him, in orbit, the ship systems continued to report the same anomaly. Containment field expanding. Not hostile. Not yet. Observational. Patient. Waiting. And somewhere in the dark beyond the system. Something older than councils. Older than civilizations. Older than fear. Registered the response. A new signal entered the record. Not distress. Not silence. Not warning. But acknowledgement. Something had answered. And now, something was answering back. On the surface, Drew stood in the wind beside a world that had been silent for 400 years. And for the first time since the journey began, he wasn't looking for what was lost. He was looking at what had survived. Because in the end, the galaxy did not remember civilizations for how carefully they waited. It remembered the ones who moved. And humanity had moved. Had shape. Structure. Had shape. Structure.